So with that, I will turn it over to Richard. We're psyched to have you, Richard. It's a really interesting. These are very interesting days, and we know that you have had some experience with helping brands kind of work through what's going on here in food. And so I'll let you take it away. I think that you're welcome to kind of jump in and start and share a little bit more about your bio as well.
Sure. Thanks, Lauren. And hi, everyone. My name is Richard Lee. It's great to be here today. And I want to thank Branchfood for putting on this series. A real quick overview about me, Lauren, if you don't mind switching to the next slide. So I'm a consumer products guy for the past 20 plus years. I've worked at big companies like Gillette and Procter & Gamble. In a variety of roles across value chain, marketing, innovation, general management, and then followed that by a series of startups like Shaser, which we ended up selling to another big CPG brand called Spectrum Brands, Netra, which was a consumer insights software, and then most recently at IndigoAg, where I led our commercialization efforts, for our consumer food business. My love is really for that right-hand circle, though, the startup world, because I know firsthand how hard it is to build something from scratch, how dramatic the highs and lows are in startup world, but also the immense pride that you get from seeing your baby or your product at retail and be successful. But in times like this, I also know that startups are probably among the most fragile businesses, right? You don't have as much runway as big companies. So you're often less able to withstand some of the system-wide shocks that we're experiencing like now. But ultimately, I believe in the power of food to not only nourish our bodies, and it's critical, obviously, in times like this, as we're all kind of bunkered down at home, but also for its potential to kind of heal ourselves and heal our planet. So that's what I was excited about at Indigo and why I got involved with Branchfood and ultimately why I'm here today. So I know the goal of these talks is to provide you with some actionable steps. And given that we're doing this webinar on a Friday afternoon, I thought about what I could tell you to consider over the weekend to prepare your startup for kind of the pandemic that we're in right now and unfortunately the recession that's likely to follow. So the topic that I wanted to talk about is startup survival tips for navigating the crisis. Generally speaking, advice is cheap, right? And every situation I want to acknowledge is unique. So these will tend to be kind of higher level recommendations, some strategic, some tactical, but it's based on some of my previous experiences in crisis situations, both kind of market-wide crises and industry-specific crisis situations. There are many things that I did horrendously wrong, and yet always were able to survive from, and then a few things that we did right. But my hope is that there may be a few nuggets there that you can learn from. So if you don't mind, Lauren, if you can go to the next slide. So I think the first thing to think about is how long is this thing going to last, right? And if you look at history, what it tells us about what some of these recessions or bear markets have lasted. The last two lasted about, in like 2001, lasted about 16 months. It was more tech driven. And then in 08, it lasted, 08, it lasted about 16 months, in 01, about 25 months from peak to trough or to get out of the recession. The other thing I want to acknowledge is that the stock market does tend to be a lagging indicator of true business health. But a couple of takeaways that I thought about as I looked at this is, first off, I think we need to be prepared for the long haul. Neither of the two previous recessions were as broad-based or reaching as this one. So I think there's at a minimum, we should be looking at about 1 or 2 years of a disruptive business environment right now. And potentially even longer, right? But I think on the flip side, the silver lining is if you look at the graph, right? If you look at the charts, the red down markets are so much shorter than the up blue markets. And so we've always recovered, even in 1918 when the market went down 85%. We've had businesses that do go under, but the ones that adapted were also the ones that thrived as the markets, as the economies, and as our industries eventually turned. So what I was hoping to start out this with is a dose of reality that this could be unlikely to be a few months, but also that there's a lot of reason for long-term optimism if we can make some changes to stabilize our situations. So with that, Lauren, if you could go to the next slide, please. I found this quote from another Boston founder that posted about it, and I really liked it, so I'm going to co-opt it for this. You know, the choppy waters are here right now and likely for the foreseeable future. The quote says, "The pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, but the leader actually adjusts the sails." I like this quote because, first of all, let's all just acknowledge that the situation sucks right now. Wife is on calls in our family room downstairs, and our kids are in a makeshift school in the basement, right? This is not what we kind of expected. And a lot of our businesses are significantly disrupted. So it's not too dissimilar to what I'm sure many of you are going through right now. The reality is none of this or anticipated this. An amazing business that's doing kind of zero in sales right now, exclusively due to COVID. But the important thing is to acknowledge that and start to move on and take action. Optimists on the other side are likely hoping for some sort of V-shaped recovery, right? That will hit the bottom soon, and then business as usual will quickly recover. And yes, as startup leaders, we're trained to be uber optimists to our investors, to our employees, et cetera, and to the market. But the reality is that was in a growth environment, and our environment has changed, right? We're in choppy waters right now. We're squarely now in a more of a survival environment. So I think while we do need to remain optimistic, we also need to be realistic as well. And as most of you guys are in the food space, it's clear that all of our businesses have changed. Some may be for the better. For example, if you're in meal kits or the food delivery or e-com business, your businesses may be doing quite well since people are not preferring to go into stores. But many of us are in a worse space. If you sold into food service, hospitality, lodging, non-grocery retail, et cetera, my guess is most of the participants in this may be in the latter group. So our business has changed, and we need to adjust the sails right now. So what should you do? If you haven't already, and many of the recommendations that I'm going to make here may be obvious or may have been done already. But I do also know firsthand, having gone through a couple of these crises, that when you're in the thick of the crisis, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and almost paralyzed on what to do. So I'm hoping that I can have a couple of both strategic and tactical steps that can be helpful to some of you. The importance is it's critical to start taking action now. So if you can actually go to the next slide. I think first and foremost, you need to recut your financial forecasts and again, be honest about and realistic and have multiple scenarios. Like I mentioned earlier, let's do your best to plan for a 1 to 2 year slowdown. If you have a trusted advisor, I would recommend trying to bounce scenarios off of them before sharing with your board or investors. I just found it really helpful to kind of level set and make sure that what you're proposing as the environment is realistic. And you know, for your board and investors, you ideally want to have a bunch of different options as well as a concrete recommendation and plan for what you're going to do differently and how your business is going to adapt. I think the reality is the best and worst cases are both shifting worse to the left right now. You're likely going to miss your revenue figures for 1 or 2 quarters or more. And depending on your business, your revenue may be down to 0 right now if you're selling into food service, for example. So as always, cash is king, but even more so in this environment. So you really want to understand your cash runway and be updating it daily, ideally weekly if necessary, based on new data coming in on sales and collections, because obviously you don't want to run out of cash. Lauren, if you can go to the next slide, please. So the other action is obviously to start to reduce your burn however and wherever possible. The reality is you probably should be cutting more than you feel comfortable cutting now, and more than you think you should. And any other executives I've talked to who've acted kind of early have had no reservations of that it was the right thing to do. And unless you're a business that has tailwinds from this crisis, it's probably the environment to be cutting right now. And generally speaking, the biggest costs are usually rent and salaries. So if you're in a co-working space, it's relatively easy. They're built for short-term rentals. But if you're in a long-term lease, I've spoken to many other startup leaders who've actually been able to discuss with their landlords renegotiating their lease, either getting some deferrals on their payments or even getting a couple of months of free rent given the situation. What you may find is that your landlord is more open now than they normally would be, as there are unlikely others companies that are looking to pick up your space right now. So besides kind of rents, a lot of the easy stuff, et cetera. At this point, one of the next big areas is people or salaries. Ideally, you first start with salary cuts and then potentially furloughs and as a last resort layoffs. And this whole topic is probably one I think that you guys may have had an entire webinar on. So I'm not going to dive too deep into this on how to manage it. But what I would advocate for is transparency, decisiveness, and empathy, and as much cushion as your company can financially afford in this market, because we're all in this together. And the good news is the government has been stepping up, so there is a bit of a cushion being provided by the government that may not fully replace their salary, but to the extent that you can, trying to give your employees cushion on severance and healthcare. On marketing, and this is coming from a marketing guy right now, you know, companies are not buying right now that much. Consumers are still buying kind of the necessary goods, but even marketing messages are pretty tricky in this environment. So anything that doesn't have a positive ROI, and if you're not calculating your marketing spend payback very detailed, I would be more aggressive in cutting that back. And on the retail side, with food, retailers are generally more focused on right now ensuring supply of existing brands versus, and also keeping their employees and customers safe versus bringing in new brands and doing a shelf reset. So likewise, you aren't going to be doing in-store demos for quite some time. Consumers don't want samples right now because they don't know who's touched it or whether it's tainted. So now's the time to really shift to other activities, whether it's producing content, like showing how consumers can make simple recipes or meals with your food products. I know this is something that we struggle with on a daily basis with 5 people in our household and making 3 meals a day plus snacks. Like, how do we continue to produce healthy food that has a variety that the family wants? So so any assistance on that is always, I think, could be welcome. All right, if you can go to the next slide, Lauren. The other piece is really obviously starting to pivot to new products or even a new go-to-market. If you've relied exclusively on restaurant sales, for example, or built awareness for primarily through sampling, maybe now's the time to build out your direct-to-consumer acquisition plan. Again, think about creating content. A couple of CEOs I've talked to recently. One is the CEO of a mobile experiential company that works a lot with food businesses, but no one's doing events right now. And so they quickly pivoted their mobile units that were previously mini retail environments for education and sampling to help enable medical professionals to conduct rapid COVID-19 tests. So this is something obviously that will be critical in the coming months for us to address the pandemic. This is the type of thing that startups are great at, the agility to move and switch rapidly in a business. Another CEO friend is in a severely impacted industry like food service, right, where his revenue has essentially gone to zero overnight. they made some tough choices. Now they're also fortunate that they had some money in the bank, but on the salary side, they now have close to 2 years runway, and they're head down building new products that are outside of this severely impacted industry because they think it's going to last for a while. So they're doubling down on new products. So what can you guys do? A lot of this will depend on your funding situation, but also what's been on your development pipeline as to where else you can go, what else you've started to invest in. But now's the time to have alternative plans. Okay, Lauren, if you can go to the next slide. Additional liquidity options, not looking in the sofa cushions for change, but the fundraising window, unfortunately, is probably closed unless you are very far down the path with an investor. And even in those situations, what I've heard is that valuations are high under pressure as well, that investors are asking for 50% reductions if they're kind of even going through with signed term sheets. So every situation is obviously different, but if you need capital, I wouldn't be haggling right now for terms on valuation or things like that. If you have it available to you, think about drawing down debt or factoring your inventory. One other side note, I guess, on this is keep an eye on your convertible note maturities. For those of you that have raised under convertible notes, you should be talking to your investors about whether you can kind of push out the maturity date or how that would convert into equity at this point. And the last piece is critical, especially today, and it's something that you should, if you haven't done already, do something right after this call, is look into the Government Stimulus Act, the CARES Act, which I think was announced a couple of days ago. It's in the $2 trillion package. There was a $350 billion carve out for SBA loans, many of which are forgivable if they're used to pay things like salary or rent. There are some restrictions, like you can't have any massive layoffs or dividend payments, so you may not be eligible, or there are things that you need to do to make sure you stay eligible. And as I understand it, there was an issue with VC or PE funded startups failing the 500 employee threshold, but also, as of today or late last night, I think that issue is being addressed. So I believe that this is something that you should look into with your banking partner. You'd apply through your banking partner, and it would be backed up by the Small Business Administration. Okay, if you can go to the next slide, Lauren. Lastly, okay, communicate. And again, this is something that with your employees, there's nothing worse for anxiety or productivity than indecisiveness or lack of transparency. So I think it's important to be clear about the business challenges that you're facing. I think everyone's well aware of the situation right now. And I think you may be surprised at the types of creative solutions your employees may bring to you for how you can weather the storm. On the board and investor side, again, I think this is the time you should be talking to your board and investors as much as possible. I think when I went through this, and it was one of the hardest things is in bringing bad news, you want to stick your head in the ground. But right now, you probably will need existing investors to bridge you. Are they able to do that? Are they willing to do that? Again, important to be forthright and honest, or at least as realistic as possible as to what the business is going to look like. Because if you're not, they're probably not going to keep cutting checks. And lastly, but not probably one of the most important is your existing customers. It's unlikely that you'll be signing new customers, but retaining your existing ones is critical. And now's the time to build trust in that relationship. How have they been impacted? Have your key contacts been laid off, or are they still there? How is this going to affect their sales and collections right now? So I think one interesting side note, I had a conversation with a friend earlier this week about a large company that unfortunately unilaterally extended their payment terms to 360 days. Everyone is trying to manage their liquidity right now. I think that's a bit dramatic and also could put a lot of their partners out of business, but you need to be having these conversations to understand how it's going to affect your cash, both customer and supplier side. Okay, Lauren, if you can go to the next slide. The last bit is a bit more of the soft one. I think one is don't go through this alone. I think that's one of the main reasons, obviously, the Branch Group is setting these up is to to have the network act as support. One of the best things that you could do is talk to your peers. I was in a CEO peer group, and it was one of the most therapeutic things for me as we went through many ups and downs. It's really helpful to discuss with others how they're managing, how they're going through it. And in this case, we're all going through the same thing, right? And maybe affecting us in slightly different ways. But you may, one, just find it helpful to talk about when it's challenging to discuss some of these things with your employees or even bringing it home to the family. Having others is really helpful. And if you can't find one, because obviously now is a little bit of a crazy time, reach out to me. I'm happy to act as a temporary sounding board because I think it's super critical at this point. And then lastly is practice self-care, and this is probably one of the hardest things to do at any time. But getting enough sleep, exercise, yoga, meditation, whatever you need to do to clear your head, eat right, and drink lots of water, and spend quality time with friends and family. I think as a leader right now, you need to be calm, you need to be decisive. And so these things of self-care are kind of important for you to think clearly through your options and make some key critical decisions. I know for me, for example, running and exercising clears my head, and has resulted in more ahas than any other activity. And I know this is, again, easier said than done, but especially in times of crisis, but I found it easier to prioritize first thing in the morning. Waking up half an hour early, go for a run or go work out is the only time I could always consistently schedule it, but it was critical for me. So hopefully you guys are also practicing self-care. And then I guess that's pretty much it. But I guess in closing, I want to close on a positive thought, which is this situation is definitely dire, right? Like, let's not sugarcoat it. But as we discussed, like the startups that make the right decisions and decisive acts right now and that survive are also the ones that most likely become leaders when the recovery will happen. And this is where startups are best. You know, startups are nimble and agile. They iterate. This is why they succeed, oftentimes outmaneuvering incumbents, because they can develop new products. They can pivot faster to meet changing consumer needs, and consumer needs are changing pretty rapidly right now. But the key is to survive, right? We're out of growth and now into survival mode. But I'm optimistic and realistic, and I hope you guys are as well. So with that, I want to say thank you and ask if there are any questions, and also offer my email for anyone that wants to reach out offline.
Thank you, Richard. Wonderful. Do we have any questions from the group? If so, please feel free to message them in the chat. They will come directly to me, and I will facilitate the conversation with Richard. If there are no questions, we're happy to have you reach out to Richard directly. He has very generously made himself available to speak with any of you directly about what you're going through, or further articulate any of the great points and guidance that he made today. So we appreciate all of you tuning in. If there are no questions, we'll wrap things up here, and you can move along your day. We on Monday have Joanna and Sean from the Harbinger team coming to share a little bit more about getting creative at home and how to manage marketing for your food-related company with the tools that you have in your current living environments. As a reminder, you can all check out branchfood.com/servingupsupport for upcoming speakers in the series, and email any feedback that you have to us at info@branchfood.com. So with that, no questions, Richard, but
Okay.
But we
Thank you,
appreciate
everybody.
your time. And if you have any other questions, feel free to follow up with Richard directly. Awesome. Great. Oh, wait, we do have one question.
Okay.
As just in the close here. What is Indigo's primary focus with the marketplace platform? Good question.
Yeah, Indigo is doubling down on the marketplace. Like every business, you know, Indigo had 11 different business units, and marketplaces where they view kind of the future of the business. So we started out as a microbial seed coating company, but really kind of connecting and ideally decommoditizing agriculture is kind of the goal. So that's where a lot of the focus and effort is on in the business right now. Just like everyone here, you know, it's picking and leading on the areas that you think are going to be ongoing and critical. So there are three different marketplaces within Indigo, one on the grain side, one on the transport side, and then the last on the carbon side. Those are kind of the probably priority A, B, and C right now within the company. Did that answer your question, or is there specifics about marketplace?
I think that was all that came through, but
okay.
But great question.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for participating. Like I said, Richard, we're appreciative of your time and guidance, and great points and helpful kind of guiding lights as we navigate these next upcoming weeks. So so thank you very much, and hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. We'll see you all back here on Monday.
Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.